So hey, this is kind of a first, but I got a sponsor for this video, Displayed. They emailed me asking to collaborate, and after asking to receive the products for evaluation, I decided they were really nice and that I'd buy this kind of stuff anyway, so here goes. Displayed produces high-quality metal posters, and after they sent me 5 prints of my choice, I was really surprised by how easy it was to display, and I was even more impressed at the breadth of designs available on the market. I even searched for Klonoa and found a few prints for purchase. I was worried it was just going to be Halo and Call of Duty Central like a lot of other pop culture-oriented websites, but I found a really good amount of variety in terms of both video game and anime content. I chose prints from Resident Evil 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, Evangelion, Mega Man X, and Fooly Cooly, which, would you look at that, is a nice tie-in to the topic of the video. I've included an affiliate link below, but you can also use the promo code ChaseFace15 to get a 15% off discount. But without further ado, let's talk about my favorite anime of all time.
Fooly Cooly, or Furikuri, as it's technically pronounced, was a bombastic OVA published by Gainax, the same people that made the hit anime titles Evangelion, Cutie Honey, Gurren Lagann, Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt, and the notorious Kill la Kill. It came out in the US in 2003, when I was only 13. I was still in my weeaboo phase where I thought I could learn Japanese by watching subtitled anime. I don't want to talk about it. It was a self-contained little fever dream of a show that captivated audiences and left us with many unanswered questions. It ended on such an inconclusive note with many plot points unresolved, and there was something fitting about that. In a way, it was complete in its emptiness. Tsurumaki, the creator, didn't want to milk the show needlessly. 6 episodes and it was done. He said he felt like he accomplished everything he wanted to with the show, that he had a lot of passions and desires that he wanted to express, and did so in the form of Fooly Cooly. And he didn't have anything else in the story that he wanted to explore. And I think that was a good call, considering the many pieces of media that gets sequel after reboot after reimagining, all for the sake of the profit motive. It's refreshing when a creator stares at the giant potential sack of money that they could make at the cost of ruining their legacy and they go, nah, I'm good. In early 2018, I got word that Fooly Cooly was getting a 2nd season, and later found out they'd be making a 3rd one. I saw the teaser trailer, which featured a female protagonist wearing Neko headphones, and I had a sinking feeling combined with a few questions, like, hey, since season 1 had Haruko seducing the protagonist, will she be bisexual and seducing these female protagonists? Will Naota, Mamimi, or Kanti show up again? Will the music be as good? Regardless, as a diehard Fooly Cooly fan, I shared the post and expressed hope that the new creators would do the show justice. As you can tell from the title of this video, that did not go over very well. But before I get too ahead of myself, I'll explain what Fooly Cooly is and what it meant to myself and many others, so as to not exclude the uninitiated who might watch my videos but have no earthly idea what I'm talking about. I should mention that I hold Fooly Cooly very near and dear to my heart, and I've watched it in its entirety over 30 times, 10 times by myself since the early 2000s, and 20 times when introducing it to friends. So needless to say, I have a strong nostalgic bias for this show, and it's very likely that I'm looking at it through an emotionally favorable lens. But after talking about it a little bit more, I'm hoping you'll understand why. Naota is a 12-year-old elementary school student who lives in Mabase, a small, fictitious city in Japan. He spends his time pretending to be nonchalant and having deep inner monologues, and attempts to act like a grown-up despite being nowhere close. His big brother Tasuku moved to America to pursue professional baseball, and left Naota his baseball bat as well as leaving behind his girlfriend Mamimi, who uses him as a flirtatious plaything. And that's it, that's his life. He goes to school, deals with his idiotic friends, hangs out by the river with Mamimi, and not much else. In his own words,
nothing amazing happens here. Everything is ordinary.
But when a mysterious pink-haired woman named Haruko shows up, things get pretty ridiculous. Naota has stuff growing out of his head, including cat ears, horns, and a robot that becomes a decently important main character. Haruko becomes the maid at his house, the nurse at the local hospital. She's even a super crazy space alien rock star when she's feeling up to it. The rest of the cast is extremely likable as well. Naota lives with his dad and grandpa who seem borderline senile and focused on unimportant things, mostly caring about porno magazines, gossiping, and seeing how well dinner turns out. Mamimi is a really interesting character to me with more development than people give her credit for, but she's mostly just incredibly stupid. She's a high school vagrant who doesn't do anything productive with her life, and smokes cigarettes and plays video games when she isn't violating Naota. It's funny how Mamimi was always my biggest crush in Fooly Cooly, even though now I really detest her as a person. Chances are, if you have even the faintest idea of what anime is, you've probably heard of Fooly Cooly. I mean, it is 4 letters and 6 episodes long. It didn't catch on initially due to Tsurumaki's fascination with American cultural themes making it foreign to Japanese audiences, but after it got popular in America, it gained more recognition back home. After it aired, it was basically a self-contained OVA that left a strong impression on the majority of viewers. Most people who review the show say the same thing. I have no idea what happened in this show.
The story makes no sense.
It's all really abstract symbolism that you probably can't catch right off the bat.
And the story is bonkers, but it's great.
I mean, some would even argue that this anime doesn't even have a plot to begin with.
Does FLCL have a plot? Technically, yes. And if you were to watch the show multiple times, then it is possible that you may have a glimpse at what was going on in the minds of the creators during what I would have to assume to be a drug-induced writing session.
Countless comments and YouTube personalities all echoed this sentiment. The thing is, that's part of the show's charm. It doesn't just feed you the story with a spoon, and even if you don't completely understand it, you'll still have a great time seeing the characters develop and overcome obstacles set to a jammin' 90s alternative rock soundtrack. Unlike most anime that runs the gamut of around 12 episodes or more, the entire series can be completed in a little over 2 hours. And since the story gets interesting exactly 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the first episode, it's incredibly easy to get into, especially if you're like me, a guy with ADHD who prefers for the fun parts of shows to come front-loaded instead of some shows getting good in the 3rd or 5th episode. Fooly Cooly is so odd that I think it would be better for newcomers to the series to watch it personally before watching this video, because while this is such a short show, there's so much to take in, visually, narratively, and tonally. There's happy, funny moments, down-tempo moments that make you think, and lots of tastefully or tastelessly executed romance that succinctly capture the sense of ennui that comes with being a tween who's still searching for their identity. And if you're still interested in seeing it for yourself, all 3 seasons are available for viewing on Adult Swim. But if you want a preview without leaving the site, I've linked to an upload of episode 1 here on YouTube in the video description. You can consider that the spoiler-free review, because from here on out I'm going to assume that you either already know about the show or don't care about spoilers. Fooly Cooly is one of like 5 anime series I've seen where I prefer the dub over the sub, including shows like Cowboy Bebop and Paranoia Agent. The voice acting is so incredibly fitting that I can't imagine it was ever done differently. I actually went and listened to the Japanese version afterwards, and it just feels so alien in comparison. It feels like the English translation gave it more energy and insanity than it originally had, and it was supervised by the creator to make sure that the voice actors had what he referred to as the same essence as the Japanese talent. Like Naota's original voice actress was one of the only actual voiceover professionals to be hired, while almost everyone else was a fresh voice. But despite that, I felt her delivery to be somewhat cold and dull compared to Barbara Goodson's shrill, annoying, but believable take on how a prepubescent 11-year-old boy might sound.
みんな来るんだよ。こんなの誰も見ないって。見てほしいんだもん。目立ちたがり。お父さんお母さんが一緒に見に来るんだもん。学芸会なんてガキっぽいんだよ。自分だって子供のくせに。猫なんて恥ずかしくてやってられるか。
Everyone's going to see it.
A few people are going to see it.
I want them to see it.
'Cause you're a show-off.
My parents are going to see it together.
School plays are for little kids.
We are kids, including you.
I'm not going to play a cat. It's embarrassing.
One of the most prominent details of the show that really stands out to me is the presentation. The first episode begins with Mamimi explaining to Naota how to posture yourself while holding a bat to guarantee hitting a home run. But while she explains this, the camera scrambles around, aiming at the mountains before drifting over to a car, eventually getting distracted by a biker and then focusing on Naota and Mamimi by the riverside. She makes a sports reference but mistakes boxing for baseball, painting her as a ditzy girl. It's chaotic and intentionally sloppy, and from that point on, you notice similar but nevertheless impressive choices in cinematography. The details are palpable, to the point where it just registers in the back of your mind as specific creative choices, rather than something that was just cobbled together and happened to work out in spite of itself. There are a lot of dynamic shots, rule of thirds, Dutch angles, interesting ways for characters to enter and exit the scene, and vivacious expressions worn on faces to convey both a sense of amusement, disappointment, fear, and everything in between. The tone is all over the place, jumping from slice-of-life comedy to action to calm, contemplative moments, back to action in any arrangement with various timing. While the entire soundtrack is comprised of alternative rock, as I'll touch on soon, silence is sparingly utilized to great effect.
You came here with my father. Why don't you go stay with him?
The reason Fooly Cooly means so much to me even as an adult approaching his 30s is because it found me at my most vulnerable state in my adolescence. I had just entered the 8th grade and I had no idea what love or sex was, aside from seeing adult themes on TV. I just knew that having a girlfriend was the end goal, and I was desperate to see what all the soap operas, romance movies, novels, and love songs were all about. Of course, I was an overweight, loquacious geek at the time, so that wasn't exactly working in my favor, but I remember how I felt as a kid when I saw Mamimi caress Naota's hands, when Haruko would tease Naota by kissing him or touching him against his will. And I saw Naota getting praised by his friends for making it with a girl and wanting more than anything to have that sort of physical connection with a cute girl myself. Of course, many relationships later, that sort of buzz has long since faded as physical intimacy in a partnership is routine. But it's really interesting how Fooly Cooly takes me back to a simpler time when I was an insecure, love-deprived teen, still figuring out what all of those raging hormones were doing. When I was younger, I had a lot of run-ins with girls like Mamimi, whom many might describe as dark or depraved. They weren't conventionally good partners or good people, but as a teenager I viewed them as troubled people in need of my potential intervention. And I wouldn't be surprised if Mamimi's mystique led many other young men down a path of trying to fix broken people, but it's been an interesting experience that helped me form a more intimate connection with Fooly Cooly. The story is very jumbled and intentionally enigmatic, but that's not to say there's no story. Every person I've ever seen review this show says the story makes no sense, and while that's not entirely invalid, it goes in the face of the show itself explaining loosely what's happening behind everything. Medical Mechanica is a shadowy organization that nobody in Mabase understands. They have robots, they have a giant iron that billows steam when sirens go off. It's meant to be confusing because we know about as much as Naota does, but I'll be primarily focusing on objective plot points that have been stated by the creators as well as some personal opinions on the meaning of some directorial choices. Fooly Cooly was scored entirely by The Pillows, whose music is an eclectic mixture of garage punk and alternative rock, setting a melancholic, nostalgic tone for the show. Tsurumaki enjoyed their music, specifically their rock ballad One Life, and asked them to use their songs for Fooly Cooly, which ended up giving them a massive increase in visibility, something they're still thankful for to this day.
気持ちでいたけど危なかったな危なかったよかったよフリクルはね大事だった俺たちの人生にはお互いにとってラッキーだったと僕は一応そう思ってますけど。
The soundtrack is well utilized to set the generally lackadaisical tone of the moment, as well as a gentle segue for the beginning of a scene, and the ridiculously energetic action settings are really well animated and juxtapose the somber moments that make a character feel real or a town feel lived in, including tracks that lend a sense of summer vacation fun to more uplifting scenes. The songs weren't written specifically for the show, but a lot of them were taken from previous albums with some of the lyrics removed. When you add the lyrics back in, they make sense in the given context. For example, when Naota confronts Mamimi on the bridge after she bought day-old bread from his father's bakery, the song Brand New Love Song plays, which illustrates the sense of listlessness Mamimi experiences after being abandoned by her ex-boyfriend. Other more frenetic songs like Come Down or Stalker were used with some noisy, nasty bass lines that really set the tone for the intensity of the moment. There were also scenes where the music in the background helped to add a level of sensory overload, adding voiceover, sound effects, music, and visuals to ensure most viewers wouldn't be able to absorb everything in one viewing.
The only thing you can do is burn and burn
Which part of this is really the truth?
Your highest goal is to receive the personal blessing of Kanti, the god of black flame.
I'm not quite done talking about Season 1, but I'll be jumping back to it as needed. I think my love for Fooly Cooly makes it difficult for me to just lay out in a brief paragraph just how much I appreciate it for what it accomplishes, which I suppose is fitting considering the frenetic nature of the show's overarching tone. Fooly Cooly Alternative and Fooly Cooly Progressive came out within a 4-month time span, with Progressive airing June 2018 and Alternative airing in full starting on September 2018, with the former starring a disillusioned young girl named Hidomi, and the latter featuring an eclectic mixture of 4 girls but primarily focusing on the mental framing of the protagonist, Kana. When the trailer was announced, I was cautiously optimistic, as I didn't see anything returning from Season 1 that I really cared about. Haruko is obviously the fan favorite and she's a lot of fun, but as a character I found her to be more of a narrative tool than an endearing person as a whole. I thought a lot of the show's heart was dependent on a young, naive boy as the main character, who was learning his identity and his place in the world, so I was much more interested in the prospect of seeing an older, more mature Naota appearing with Haruko's guitar, showing the viewer how he had grown and how proud we should be of his progress, as opposed to an anime about a bunch of girls which already exist in great quantity as of the time of my writing this script. The main reason why I've waited 6+ months later to make this review is because I completely forgot that Season 3 aired. I'm friends with a decent number of people in the anime reviewer community, and I didn't even hear them talking about it because it was just so forgettable. I'm not much of a TV guy because I find most of what plays these days is just reruns and bad sitcoms, so needless to say my cable box is pretty dusty. But I took note of when the first episode of Season 2 aired and plopped down in front of my TV the night of its premiere, excited yet nervous to see the entertainment quality I would be met with. I had remained mostly ignorant to the contents of the new season because I didn't want to let fear-mongering fans of the original taint my mindset, and I wanted to also attempt to judge it as its own original series that might have just used a similar setting or motif, so I wanted to be open-minded going in. Season 2 starts strong with an opening narrated by the main protagonist Hidomi, with a promisingly dismal backdrop of a white world as she has a red horn growing from her head. I really felt the emotion coming in strong as my ears were graced by the beautiful rock ballads of the Pillows, whom I hadn't heard since 2003. It felt like coming home for the first time, hearing the passionate vocals of Sawao Yamanaka belting out the lyrics in a powerful wail. Hit me pretty hard, and combined with the framing of the digital elements of the music as Hidomi's ringtone waking her up from a surreal dream, was a clever transition that seemed reminiscent of the directorial stylings of Season 1. The song has also been re-recorded since the original version back when it was composed in 2002, which is good because the original version didn't sound nearly as powerful or passionate.
Life is beautiful.
Then as the next scene plays, we're introduced to one of the most useless and uninteresting characters in the show, Hidomi's mom, who's just always in such a chipper mood and yearns for Hidomi's affectionate reciprocation. Hidomi's mom says to her,
"Hidomi, sweetie, you're getting better at that tsundere personality of yours every day."
Which makes no sense considering a tsundere is a way of expressing that a character is cold and hostile before they start warming up to someone they love. But Hidomi never shows any real emotion for the entirety of the show. A more fitting title would have been kudere, someone who's cynical and emotionless, so already we're off to a bad start. Next we get an introduction of a mysterious character named Jin Yu, and the framing and sound effects are oddly similar to the first season. After that, we're introduced to the setting that will dominate the majority of the next 2 seasons: school. We're shown the 3 lead male characters, Ide, Mori, and Marco. Ide is the only noteworthy one who becomes a main character due to his involvement with Hidomi, and I was interested to find out that he's voiced by Robbie Daymond, known most prominently for his portrayal of Prompto from Final Fantasy XV, but also as Tuxedo Mask in the Viz Media Sailor Moon series, Smokey Brown from JoJo, Moomin Rider from One Punch Man, and Crollo Lucifer from Hunter x Hunter. Crollo? I haven't seen that show, but everyone says I should. I didn't care for him as Prompto mostly because he was playing an annoyingly energetic and optimistic character, but I actually really enjoyed his performance as Ide, and I'd go so far as to say he's the best character in Season 2, both in terms of design as well as his overall character traits. And we begin to understand how this show's creative team misunderstood the appeal of the original. In Season 1, there were plenty of crazy, heated discussions and arguments, but they added to the craziness of the scene on top of the well-animated action. Here, they're just arguing because the creative team didn't know how to make things exciting or funny in an organic way, so they all come off as a bunch of bored assholes.
All the hippest guys are wearing skirts nowadays, don't you know?
Marco, is that true? Does this mean your old fart buddies sleeping on park benches are suddenly fashionable?
Who are you calling an old fart?
A substitute teacher comes in and starts dispensing comedic relief with a deadpan delivery, and anyone familiar with Season 1 will probably recognize that the voice actress for Haruko, Kari Wahlgren, plays her, but she does a decent job at creating an interesting character voice.
What in your estimation is the most important thing in the world to you? Yes, you who are the weakest links in our society. Yes, you over there.
I don't know.
Correct answer.
The show attempts to compete with Season 1's fanservice-y sexual bits by having the teacher explicitly show the students porn. Not only is this uncomfortable to watch, but it doesn't add anything to the scene or our understanding of why the teacher is doing it, aside from the directors checking off a box saying, had inappropriate content to remind viewers of the similarities to Season 1. After that, we're shown Hidomi being an unlikable character as she serves a bunch of guys at her family cafe, and then Jin Yu shows up again and runs Hidomi over with her car, after which point she says,
"A little bit more and she would have overflowed."
Overflowed?
She uses the phrase overflow like it has some kind of pre-established meaning, but in Season 1, Mamimi said,
I'm gonna overflow. What? I'm gonna overflow.
What do you mean?
because she was too stupid to articulate what was happening to her. On top of that, Mamimi never had anything come out of her head like Naota did, and we saw in the prologue that Hidomi will eventually be sprouting stuff from her head, so it seems like they just reincorporated the phrase because they figure fans of the series will giggle and clap at the first mention of something familiar. Then as Jin Yu leaves, she says,
"Careful of the woman on the Vespa. For your own good."
Which is the show's way of telling you, hey, please don't change the channel, something good from Season 1 will be happening soon, just please rate this show highly on my anime list. After that, Hidomi spells out the beginning of her character arc by performing a soliloquy about how she's without purpose. This is followed by one of the most boring action scenes known to man, as the camera remains almost entirely still while Hidomi runs away. She reunites with Ide, who attempts to lead her to safety, and then the commotion resumes. Man, that's some nice CG. Didn't you like it when they did the same thing in the original? Oh wait, most of Season 1 was a combination of CG and traditional animation that looked far better. Oh well. We see Hidomi overflowing before Jin Yu shows up to ram her car into the robot monster thing, which settles the fight and segues into an uninteresting conversation about Jin Yu looking for Haruko. Hidomi notices her horn in the mirror, and then we cut back to the present while the pillow song Little Busters plays, something that was done at the end of every episode in Season 1. Hidomi and her mom make small talk while the camera points towards the kitchen as we hear dishes breaking, before it's revealed that Jin Yu will be their live-in housekeeper. Not scoring points for originality, are we? Lastly, we're shown more classroom antics, and as the teacher shows up, Hidomi scrolls idly through her text messages as she sees a bunch of people talking about Fooly Cooly while the teacher's speech grows more cringy and obnoxious.
Like a bottom-feeding fish in a pond, gathering underneath a weeping willow tree. There's a lot of gravity underneath all of you. Hidomi roll down. You must conquer into our monarchy, you so stand up!
She reveals herself to be Haruko, and all the students celebrate for some reason, which probably reflected how the team expected the audience to react. Then we see Haruko making the DreamWorks face, and she ends with a smug line that comes off as, "That's right, I'm the reason you like this show."
That's right, the real one's finally appearing.
A common criticism I'd like to address that many apologists of bad media like to bring up is, despite this being a sequel, it's unfair to directly compare the new season with the old season. Treat it as its own self-contained show, or else you're being unfair. This mindset enables lazy sequels while dismissing all criticism as excessive nitpicking. As Adam of Your Movie Sucks and I discussed in our Death Note Netflix discussion, if you don't want people to draw comparisons between the new IP and the original, call it something different and phrase it as some sort of spiritual successor. When you say Fooly Cooly Season 2, guess what? People are going to expect recurring elements from Season 1, including characters, music, and plot points. Therefore, disappointment and unmet expectations are inevitable, especially since this is coming after 15 years since the original show aired. From this point on, the show only goes downhill, save for a few highlights in which the director pulls off a cool style shift like in Episode 5, in which the artistic approach changed to accommodate a more wispy, thick outlined aesthetic, including an introductory dream sequence reminiscent of charcoal that actually looked more fitting for Fooly Cooly, since it's been known to have a more experimental art style. Who can forget in Episode 2, Firestarter, when all of the characters were suddenly crude little rotoscope-esque sketches? Granted, that looked pretty bad, but it was different, and it lasted less than 30 seconds. It was the effort that counted. The remainder of Season 2 suffers from repeated anticlimaxes in which Hidomi would appear to overflow before the show would just move on as if the viewer wasn't meant to expect a crazy action sequence. Eventually, Hidomi experiences her first true surge of power, which is so over-exaggeratedly badass that it's hard to take seriously as anything other than production IG trying to emulate the cool aesthetic of Gainax to compensate for their show completely lacking an interesting protagonist for whom viewers may want to draw fan art. Like, is it just me or does her powered-up design look a little bit too kill-a-kill-y? Unlike Season 1, which had a strong emphasis on character development and interpersonal drama, Season 2 continues to focus almost entirely on the overarching story, with a milquetoast attempt at ensuring fans wouldn't be left out in the cold by painfully spelling out every bit of story and supposed character motivations. For example, when Ide is working at a scrapyard performing manual labor, instead of just letting the character's reactions explain the context of his actions, the show outright says,
He pretends to be the class clown, sporting a buzz cut and acting all dumb at school.
when in reality he's actually struggling to make ends meet.
This rips the subtext out of the viewer's jurisdiction, because it spends so much time over-explaining and making sure fans didn't get lost in the lore like many newcomers did to Season 1, that it ends up diluting the remainder of the show and detracting from all the fun stuff fans likely expected to see. I remember in episode 1 when Naota birthed both Kanti and a robot hand from his forehead's NO portal, and how cool that was to see at the end of the first episode. And I remember when the remainder of its body came out in episode 2. Remember when Ninamori produced that weird creature in episode 3, and it was only defeated when Haruko accidentally dropped Naota's spicy curry lunch into its mouth? Or episode 4, when Naota had to step up and swing the bat in order to save Mabase? Episode 5 had plenty of action, as Haruko and Commander Amaro had a non-stop gunfight, in which Haruko completely wrecked him and his team, before a giant medical mechanical robot terrorized the city with a giant hand cannon that he attempted to use to kill Haruko by placing the barrel of the gun over Haruko and still not managing to finish her off. In other words, actual stuff happened. We didn't have all this bullshit where the camera stops to appreciate Haruko's well-written dialogue, and in the rare occasion that it did, it served to develop her as an enigmatic or entertaining character, or to add to the insane yet gorgeously drawn action segments. Anyway, let's finish up and look at Season 3, I guess. Fully Coolly Progressive stars a girl named Kana and features her likable cast of friends, Pets, Hijiri, and Mosan. It takes place once again primarily at school, and after the dumpster fire that was Season 2, fans had high hopes that Alternative would redeem the series, or at the very least be an improvement from Progressive. Were they right? Or is this the sickest rendition of the sunken cost fallacy seen yet? Episode 1 starts with a soliloquy performed by Kana, who talks about the familiarity of everyday life, while mentioning a bunch of novel little comforts and scrolling through her charmingly broken phone. See, viewer, she's just so casual and nonchalant and relatable. She can't afford to just replace a phone screen on a whim. She's just as poor as you are. We cut to the school where Kana glomps her friend Pets, who tells her how her dad was being gross at the breakfast table, before we see Mosan trying to put away her shoes while struggling to do so because she's too busy holding Dr. Pepper. She's fat, if you haven't noticed, and that will be a recurring gag in the show. We learn that Hijiri is a model that knows how attractive she is, making her immediately self-absorbed and thereby kind of unlikable. Pets has no meaningful personality traits whatsoever, she's just there. Lastly, Kana is the main character who's prone to whiny fits, and this becomes incredibly unappealing throughout the course of the 3rd season. The localization is also abhorrent.
OMG, girls.
For reals? For reals? For reals?
Oh my god.
Kana just super wiped out.
She makes me feel all the feelings. No prob. Double awesome.
Oh,
how about this one?
You savage.
That could be chill.
Meow. Necklace.
We transition to the classroom where the girls gossip about Kana's crush, and then we cut to the girls eating on the nearby staircase while laying down on one another casually, and I can only assume we're meant to view this as a visual representation of how close and natural they are as a group. We cut to Kana working at her ramen shop waitress job where we meet Tsukada, a guy who works for the organization who opposes Medical Mechanica, and he's got a great voice, namely because he's voiced by Ray Chase, also known as the voice of Noctis from Final Fantasy XV. I kinda wish we had Ray and Robbie in the same season, since they're genuinely good voice actors, and I just want to see them in more stuff together, I don't know. They look up and watch a broadcast from the Bureau of Interstellar Immigration, in which a woman says there will be a travel ban, and upon Tsukada remarking,
"A travel ban, huh?"
Kana starts giggling. Why? What was funny about that? That wasn't even a joke. Haruko then immediately makes her appearance and starts sizing up Kana because that's a thing she did in Season 1, and they need to play her character as close to the book as possible. Haruko starts explaining Kana's character arc to her about how she's a confused adolescent with no direction. Then we cut to the gang hanging out in the community center. Kana looks at a Jenga piece that says "Never Knows Best" on it, once again harkening back to the infamous catchphrase that was seen on Mamimi's cigarettes. And we're never given a reason to assume this makes sense in world, since none of the other pieces bear this marking. In Season 1, Mamimi either wrote those words on every cigarette she had in order to express her existential weariness, or it was a legitimate brand of cigarettes that she bought. But here they just have it written on a random puzzle piece to tie it into Season 1 and cater to the fans of the original. Like, is the viewer really meant to infer that Never Knows Best is a brand that dabbles in both big tobacco and carpentry exclusively? We see the girls constructing a rocket out of Dr. Pepper bottles before we're presented with an intermission of the Pillows playing the ending theme of Season 3, which is cool and everything, but seems really out of character for what fans might have expected. The Pillows covered the whole soundtrack as always, hanging out in the shadows and never making a big thing out of it unless interviewed outright, but they never got a dedicated segment in the actual show itself to say, yeah, that's right, it's the Pillows, and you, nostalgic viewer, fucking love the Pillows. We get more nothing happening as the girls go about their usual school business, and then the show cuts to them having a wacky time laughing and taking pictures and buying stuff at arts and crafts stores, as we see Mosan continue to purchase and consume food because, haha, fat people! people. This is the kind of shit that annoys me the most because in season 1, it was pretty apparent that childhood for the main characters was not always rosy and fun. There were plenty of moments where Naoto was just standing around asking himself, why am I here? What am I doing? Who am I? It painted him as a highly relatable character when I was a kid and didn't have any goals in life, especially when I was in high school and everyone was putting pressure on me to know who I was and start making really weighty decisions about my future. Here, season 3 forgoes most of that heavy realism and just says, if we show these young girls forming wacky yet nostalgic memories in which they have an adventure shopping together, it'll serve to tell the viewer just how close they are and how many good times they experienced, so that when things don't go well for them in the future, it'll really have weight. I don't feel like these characters are believable people. I see them more as scientifically concocted personas engineered to elicit an emotional response from the audience in place of actual substance. And sure, there are genuine attempts at character arcs, and people realizing their faults and becoming a better person as a result, but it was buried in all of these time-wasting segments where people are just reacting to poorly animated combat scenes and talking about boys in school that it feels so watered down when the show eventually has something insightful to say. After they complete their bottle rocket, a giant pin appears from the sky, which is apparently supposed to guide the medical mechanica irons, smashes into their building, and soon after emits a green electronic energy that creates a monster out of a nearby mannequin, which prompts Haruko to dropkick her and engage in a brief and unsatisfying combat sequence with the alien, during which Kana sprouts a little pink flower thing out of her forehead. After the alien gets even bigger and the group evacuates from the crumbling building, Haruko approaches Kana with a pervy expression and yanks the flower out of her forehead, revealing a
1967 model Mustang!
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Thanks. The fight is incredibly short with very little spectacle. Speaking of the visuals, the art in both seasons 2 and 3 both look and feel incredibly shallow and rushed, with minimalistic shading handled only on the hair and neck, and the frame rate feels really cranked down to save money on in-betweens. Speaking of in-betweens, there are a few present throughout both seasons, and while I know there's been a large movement on social media for people to stop judging in-betweens as bad art, a lot of these are less about bad art and more about bad art direction. You can see with a few of these shots that Haruko is just sliding on the background while it's moving underneath her at an independent speed, and it's a little uncanny to watch. More annoyingly than that is the constant use of smears, which on their own usually look pretty good and were utilized to fantastic effect in season 1, but here they're just used to bridge the gap and stretch the budget as much as possible on in-betweens, usually with a 1 or 2 frame smear that aren't obvious when watching it in real time, but become apparent when you look at it frame by frame. There's also a really cheap animation method used in which there will be 2 independent layers which move in an alternating pattern, meaning one side will move and then pause, and then the other side will move and pause, creating a visual style that looks passable in normal speed, but really, really bad when you slow it down. There are also a handful of scenes that just use zooms in lieu of actual well-drawn animations, in which something will be scaled up before zooming out to give the illusion of motion. The worst excuse for anime that I've ever seen would have to be the final episode of Season 2, in which Haruko and Kanti fight a bunch of medical mechanica robots, but fight is an extremely generous word to use. They recycled 3 robot designs multiple times and had Haruko touch them before they rotated out of frame. I can literally do this in Adobe Premiere. Alright, that took me 30 seconds. Equally bad are the establishing shots which serve as a segue between scenes. In the original, there were these interesting low-angle perspectives, aerial shots, hallway scenes, and just a plethora of well-drawn canvases that are a joy to look at and appreciate. And what do the new seasons do? Each episode is dedicated to every character, with episode 2 featuring Hijiri having a semi-romantic but overall uneventful experience in which he wastes time dating a douchebag who leaves her for Haruko, followed by a really unattractive CG combat scene that clearly makes fun of Transformers. Haruko-san gets episode 3, which shows her family also being a bunch of incompetent, overweight people, because fat people are just inherently funny, without having to do anything clever, according to the directors. And she gets mad at Kana, and I guess she has a character arc where she becomes a fashion designer, and Haruko wears her outfit before the remainder of the episode becomes about the fashion show and how fabulous Haruko is. And earlier in episode 3, Haruko uses a rap to explicitly explain Kana's character motivation to the audience.
You got no dreams of your own, so you help your friends with theirs, yo.
Episode 4 pertains to Kana trying to hook up with this guy from her school, and Haruko tries sabotaging it because this has basically just become Coyote and Roadrunner at this point. They almost get close enough to kiss before something crazy interrupts it, as the overarching theme of the show seems to be the fear of commitment. Well, not really, but that's how it feels when the writers refuse to dwell on any one scene long enough for it to get interesting. There's also a flashback to when a young Kanda and Haruko met, and how she originally seduced him and used him for his head as well. I would have appreciated a lot more flashbacks in the show to clarify Haruko's origins as well as to bridge the gap on what happened between seasons, but I think this is the only one. Actually, I lied. Episode 5 is all about how Pets and Kana met. We learn a little bit about her weird-ass family and then never see her again. And it turns out Pets is going to live on Mars with her family. I'm assuming this is a reference to the piece of trivia that Tsurumaki was thinking of including a twist ending to Season 1 that would reveal Mabase's location on Mars, and they decided to throw that in as a locale for some reason. Then Episode 6 opens with Haruko fighting a bunch of Medical Mechanica Conti-esque robots, while the credits start appearing individually in the margins, and Kana has her entire character monologue spelled out, in which she explains how she's horribly afraid of being abandoned.
Because I didn't want to be by myself. I was terrified of not being liked.
This ends in her screaming, and apparently the power of her love and dedication saves the entire town in the most grating way possible. Immediately after the scene is over, we see a shot-for-shot replay of the opening scene to episode 1, with nothing of value added. And that's it. That's the end. So if you can't tell, I don't like seasons 2 and 3. At all. It's a combination of a number of things, primarily in the animation and writing departments as mentioned previously. If you enjoy these seasons even passively, I want to reiterate as always that I don't think you have terrible taste just because you don't expect to be blown away by every piece of media you experience. It's okay to like this show. I just think that in order to genuinely enjoy it, you either have to have a fundamental lack of understanding of what made Fooly Cooly memorable, or you tend to just consume media without giving it a lot of critical thought. As you've probably noticed, there's almost no compelling reason to watch this show if you had even a passing interest in the first season. Sure, the Pillows came back for a few select songs, a handful of which were recycled from season 1, with the remainder taken from their mid-2000s albums and re-recorded in a higher quality. But interestingly enough, less than 10% of the entire soundtrack featured in 2 and 3 has the Pillows' music utilized, with a number of tracks like Last Dinosaur being lazily reincorporated. The remainder is handled by a band called Ron. The result is an extremely generic musical style serving to sound like a backdrop more than any music people would actually add to their collection. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the music is mostly composed by the Pillows, since it's very clear they were trying to emulate the same sort of stylings, albeit with limited success. I have every Pillows album on my phone, my computer, YouTube playlists, but you'd never catch me listening to any of these new tracks except for possibly using it as some backdrop music for my videos. And that's because so many of the tracks are so insipidly forgettable that they were clearly engineered formulaically by someone who didn't give a shit about genuinely adding a sense of groundedness to the scene or characters. We're talking about baby's first slice of life anime level of compositional aptitude here. Aside from that, you may have noticed that, nothing really happened. The action scenes were really brief, limited, and visually underwhelming thanks to what I can only assume, as I mentioned earlier, were likely budgetary constraints. Back in the day, Gainax had fuck you money as a result of Evangelion that they put towards letting a bunch of young artists play with digital media to make some interesting stuff, giving us the trippy experience that was OG Fooly Cooly. But this time around, they tried to turn what was primarily an action romantic comedy into just a romantic comedy with hints of action sprinkled here and there, which obviously is not what 99% of Fooly Cooly fans were looking for. In Season 1, Haruko kissed Naota several times, Mamimi gave Naota hickeys, and Ninamori came dangerously close to kissing him. And while granted they were all against his will, it was a strange intimacy that stirred up any potential monotony of two people just standing around and talking, or people hitting shit with guitars in the event that action wasn't preferential for some viewers. When you strip all of that out and just have teases and hints before stopping, it blue balls the audience into wanting that scene to actually happen. Remember in episode 5 how Naota and his father were competing over Haruko's affection by using BB guns and playing guerrilla warfare tricks on each other? together, and then Kitsurubami started firing her 50 caliber sniper rifle at Kanti, leading Naota to believe that he's actually the one doing all the damage before the battle spills into the street, and Naota gets hit by a car as his Uzis continue to spin without him, leading to him grabbing the guns and rotating along with them in a hilariously over-the-top fashion. Remember in that same episode when Haruko had a bunch of crazy bullet time carnage in which he absolutely decimates Amarao's entire team of agents, even going so far as to escape from a 30-man pileup followed by a really slick pose and expression? Hell, remember that entire episode? A bunch of stuff happened, and all of it was either visually really striking, pleasing to the eye, and genuinely fun to watch. One episode of Fooly Cooly has more polished action than the entirety of both seasons 2 and 3. Although I will admit that season 3 had a really nice ending sequence combined with a great pillow song and a quaint little stop-motion animation, as well as the aforementioned well-animated introduction in season 2. The production quality overall is dubious, especially in regards to the visuals. First, here's Haruko getting a volleyball slammed in her face. It looks so goddamn cheap. Let's look at a scene in season 1 that did it better. Look at that impact, that animation, those in-between frames. But nope, in this scene they cut from normal face to dent in 2 frames. This simple moment from season 1 showed how rich you can make your show look if you include a lot of super unnecessarily detailed in-betweens, and seasons 2 and 3 show that you can use cheap obfuscation and blatant diversionary tactics in order to cut corners and shove out an uninspired pile of dog shit that they know won't turn a real profit 15 years after the first season aired. So why bother making it look good? I'll show a few more scenes here with some really interesting in-betweens that added a lot of personality to the scenes. I was concerned and infuriated that a show I hold in such high regard was given such a lazy treatment, to the point where I watched some of the Adult Swim behind-the-scenes videos to gain a greater understanding of where the project went wrong. When I found this little segment featuring the CEO of Production IG, Mitsuhisa Ishikawa, and the executive producer of Season 1 and producer of Seasons 2 and 3, Maki Terashima, explaining the backstory of how these sequels were made, and I was horrified by what I found.
We met with the original creator of Furikuri, Tsurumaki-san, and all they said was, no, it was not possible. And we asked them why, and creatively, Tsurumaki said that he's already done what he wanted to achieve in Furikuri. I didn't want to give up because it was a title that I was very passionate about, and I knew that this was something that Cartoon Network really wanted to do too. And I kept trying, and then one day I found out that the rights to that property was available, and I told the president of Production IG to buy it because I can definitely find a partner to co-produce it with.
So congratulations, Ms. Terashima. Your passion for Fooly Cooly was also ultimately its own undoing. The problem with a Fooly Cooly sequel at its root is a conceptual one. To a lot of us, what stood out about Fooly Cooly wasn't just the superficial aspects, not just the 90s aesthetic or the jammin' soundtrack, but the vision behind it, and how that vision tied all these surface-level things into a cohesive whole. The original Fooly Cooly was made with a spirit of rebellion. Here were all these kids at Gainax, rich off their ass from Evangelion money, deciding to use this new financial freedom and cutting-edge animation technology to get experimental. Fooly Cooly was an outright rejection of what was popular in anime at the time. It was a show no one was asking for or wanted to see, and it pandered to no one. Tsurumaki took elements he knew well and had personal interests in, and put them together not because it would guarantee sales or merchandise, but because it appealed to him and because it was a personal artistic expression. That isn't to say there were no limits placed on Fooly Cooly, but these limits and regulations were for the most part self-imposed. Fooly Cooly is a form of sincere and personal expression so rarely found in anime. It demonstrates that a show must not bend to market trends or fan demand to be successful and timeless. That's what's striking about Fooly Cooly. That's what will make it relevant for decades to come. The moment you take that, turn it into a franchise, and say fans want more Fooly Cooly, so give it to them, it ceases to be that personal statement. Koair saw the half-hearted acquiescence from Tsurumaki and give him a nominal position as supervisor. It's patently obvious that he had no involvement just from looking at how different Fooly Cooly Alternative and Progressive are from the original. The visual philosophies have nothing in common. Could another director even capture that exact same vision that Tsurumaki had? I mean, it's possible, but the moment you put the stipulation of make something like Fooly Cooly on any creator, the rebellious spirit of Fooly Cooly is gone. It's pandering now. It's bending over to a demand. Rather than a bunch of kids gushing about their hobbies and favorite bands and making an anime out of it, Jason DeMarco comes over asking for a very specific product from you. You can't say, oh, do whatever you want. Let your artistic spirit fly free. Except it has to have these characters, this message, this music, hire these actors, and be this long. Is that really the foundation for a personal work of art? Chances are these directors and animators, they don't really like the pillows or Vespas or whatever. They probably wanted to make an anime about the music they like instead. But they're compromising with seasons 2 and 3, making something fans want to see, not their passion. And is that really what Fooly Cooly is about? Adaptations, sequels, fan pandering, these are all very common in anime. But the whole point of Fooly Cooly was to rebel, to buck against these trends. And it's depressing to see Adult Swim miss that point when they commissioned a sequel. Fooly Cooly 2 and 3's inability to compare to the original in terms of composition or editing is a direct consequence of this flawed line of thinking. The soul of an anime can't be so easily recreated, just by getting back the same voice actors and attaching an alternative to the title. It's in the vision behind the show, which Fooly Cooly 2 and 3 severely lack. I don't doubt that the Adult Swim team that funded this new project love Fooly Cooly. I do too. But after watching the new series, I realized that if you love something, you just have to let it go.
Big thanks to my friend Econ, who helped me construct this doozy of a script by helping me with some pointers about animation techniques and some behind-the-scenes knowledge about the original creator. If you like anime and manga reviews with a critical eye from a long-time otaku, make sure to check out his channel, which I've linked in the description as well as in the video. And an extra special thanks to Displate for sponsoring this video and helping to support the channel. I'm really happy with the quality and selection of products from their website. And if you want to help out the channel as well as get yourself some sleek metal art prints, consider shopping for some using the promo code ChaseFace15 or by using the affiliate link in the description below. Thanks for watching as always, and take care.